And I think companies like Old National who share Hoosier values wake up every day and think about, yes, we have this objective to serve our shareholders, but we also have this objective to take care of all of our stakeholders, including our community, including our people. And I don't think that you can underestimate the amount of impact that local Hoosier companies make in the state of Indiana.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Jim Ryan, the chairman and CEO of Evansville-based Old National Bank Corp., which owns Old National Bank. Old National is the largest bank headquartered in Indiana and among the 30 largest banks in the United States. Old National has been growing its assets and footprint since Jim joined the bank as assistant treasurer almost 25 years ago. But the bank has really taken off since Jim became its CFO in 2016, growing from what was primarily a Southern Indiana and Western Kentucky bank into a bank whose presence stretches from Minnesota to North Carolina. Its assets have grown from around $19 billion to more than $53 billion in just the last 5 years. Jim became Old National CEO in 2019 after spending almost his entire career in banking and finance. He is a Michigan native and graduated from Grand Valley State University near Grand Rapids, which is where Jim started his banking career as an intern at Old Kent Bank. When Old Kent was acquired by Fifth Third in 2001, Jim left to become assistant treasurer at Old National. Since joining Old National Bank, Jim has become a pillar of the Evansville business community. He is immediate past chairman of the Evansville Regional Economic Partnership and has been vice chair of the Evansville Regional Business Committee and secretary and treasurer of the Southwest Indiana Regional Development Authority. He is also on the boards of Deaconess Hospital and Deaconess Health Systems, Golf Gives Back, and the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. In 2023, he agreed to serve a 3-year term on the American Bankers Association's board of directors. Here's our conversation. Jim, welcome to Off the Record podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Well, Nate, thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to give you and Gary and the whole team here at IBJ Media just an absolute shout out for the great work you do every day to really promote our state and bring the best of our state to across the entire state now.
That's very kind of you to say. And as I said, we love to have you here talking with us today, Jim. Before we talk about your professional pursuits, I'm interested because I read about something interesting and fun about you, about hearing about some of your retirement goals. I understand you're into boating and that you want to travel the 6,000-mile Great Loop. And so I'm just curious, first, what is the Great Loop and how did you fall in love with boating?
I grew up around water and on water almost my entire life. And we have a place down in Florida that's on the water, and I just can't get away from it. It's my happy place. If I'm on a beach or I'm on a boat, that's definitely where our family likes to spend time. And so I heard about this actually growing up from another boater. And the idea is that you can start anywhere along the journey. It's a 6,000-mile loop, as you said, and you can start anywhere. For example, like in the Great Lakes, and start in Chicago and get into the inland river system, in Chicago, and take it all the way south to the Gulf of Mexico, and then travel the Gulf of Mexico around Florida, up the eastern seaboard, and eventually, make yourself towards like the St. Lawrence Seaway, get back into the Great Lakes system by going either through Lake Erie or through Canada. And the only point is you have to stop and start at the same exact point over that journey. And they can take anywhere from literally 6 weeks if you just went entirely on its own, or up to a couple years by really taking advantage and enjoying all of the towns and communities that ultimately you might find dockage at night. So I think it would be an incredible opportunity to see so much of America that you couldn't necessarily see, but only by water.
That's really neat. So do you have a timeline for trying to accomplish that feat?
Well, we haven't announced any future retirement dates. And to be honest with you, I'm still trying to convince my wife this is a good thing. She has told me that she'll travel by car and stay in hotels along the way. But I've got a lot of friends who want to do the journey with me, including some fellow bank CEOs that we've shared this discussion with. So I'm lining up partners. So I'll reach out to you and your assistant to see if we can get you scheduled for a part of the journey.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd love to take part in some of the journey. That sounds awesome. But before you do that, hopefully for Indiana's sake, for Southwest Indiana's sake, for Old National Bank's sake, that you've got some time before that journey begins and the retirement you start thinking about. But I want to talk a little bit about your career. How did you end up landing in banking? And I read that you weren't necessarily crazy about your accounting classes anyway in college.
Yeah, the accounting classes weren't my strength, that's for sure. But I really enjoyed the finance classes, and in such fact that I had the lead of the finance department at Grand Valley was passing me out a midterm exam, and he said, as he passed out the exam, he said, "How would you like a well-paid internship at a bank?" And I said, well, who wouldn't? So he said, meet me after class. And so shortly after class, I went and he gave me the 30-second view of the internship, dialed the phone number, talked to the gentleman out on the phone and said, Al, I've got your guy. And I literally have not stopped working for a bank since. So it was a great opportunity to start in banking. And as you mentioned, I started at Old Kent Bank, which was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and ultimately left Old Kent Bank for Old National Bank. So there is one more old bank in the country. And I always tell their CEO that they are my bailout bank in case this thing at Old National doesn't work out.
So you mentioned that a professor kind of noticed you. And again, interesting tidbit. I understood that you wore a tie back then to class. Was that part of what made you stand out?
Well, I don't know who gave you that information, but that is accurate that I used to wear a tie and Argyle socks and khaki pants and occasionally a blazer.
So you must have been like a young Michael J. Fox.
Yes, it was a young. I might get my dress tips from him.
So that certainly didn't hurt catching the professor's eye. That's pretty neat. So as I mentioned in the intro, Jim, you've held a lot of different positions at Old National and elsewhere. And now that you're CEO, I understand you've described being CEO, that communication is one of the most important things that a CEO, of course, has to do, and that's imperative in your job. Is communicating and those skills, was that something you knew kind of coming into this job, or is it something that you've learned as you progressed in the job?
I always appreciated that communication was important. In fact, Old National is really lucky to have a head of communications report directly to me, which I think is different than maybe other CEOs might place importance on that. And so for me, that's incredibly important. You think about all the communication you have to do every day to stakeholders, right? And there's a lot of stakeholders out there. And I do think that ultimately, as you think about messages inside your company or messages outside your company, if you don't place importance on communication, and it's one of the easiest things you can do. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's one of the easiest things you can do. And I think sometimes many CEOs miss the opportunity.
Yeah, it's obviously a key component of any business, having the right communication effort and happening on a consistent basis. So Old National, as I mentioned, is now the largest bank headquartered in Indiana. And just a couple of months ago, you closed on the purchase of a Nashville-based called Capstar Bank and raising your worth of your bank to $53 billion. The bank has more than doubled in size over the last several years. How have you accomplished that, and what do you see ahead for the bank?
A lot of hard work by many, many team members across our company. And we're only able to have this great success, I think, because of the hard work and dedication. Many of my leaders have been with us 20 plus years. And because of their hard work and success, we really get these opportunities. And so for us, we're really excited about entering the Nashville market. We've long thought about Nashville as an opportunity. It's only, as you know, about 2 hours away from our Evansville headquarters, and maybe the closest partnership we've done in the most recent years, where we've gone as far as Minnesota and Chicago and Detroit and places like that. But this is pretty close to home.
And such a growth market, right?
Such a growth market.
Yeah.
Every time we're there and you realize, you see all those cranes in the airs and the types of amenities they're putting in place. It's an exciting time for us. It's an exciting opportunity for us. And we're really excited about the team that we're bringing together. We actually had a small team there already in place. And so this allows us to leverage the team that we have in place of around 10 individuals coupled with this new partner, and brings us all the way through Chattanooga and Knoxville, and then all the way over to Asheville, North Carolina.
So the bank is it 190 years old this year?
190 years old this November.
I mean, founded in 1834. And of course, seeing this type of growth now under your leadership, it's an amazing story. I mean, I don't know if is it the oldest bank in Indiana, or it's got to be pretty darn close at 190.
It's one of the oldest banks in the whole country.
Yeah.
There's always a rivalry for who has the oldest bank, and I'm not quite sure who it can actually claim being the oldest bank. But as you know, what I think also is kind of interesting for Old National, and you've been to our headquarters, and it's right on the Ohio River in Evansville. It's one main street in Evansville. You don't get any more central than that. But it's the exact same location the bank started on 190 years ago. And I tell that story wherever we go. And, it's interesting. We've seen times of stress, with the great financial crisis. Most recently last year, we had some of the largest bank failures that happened. So sometimes clients say, are you safe? Is my money safe with you? And I told them we've been around for 190 years.
Yeah.
We've seen great depressions. We've seen previous pandemics. We've seen economic crisis. And we continue to not only survive, but really thrive in those types of environments. And I do think part of that secret sauce are obviously the people that we have here, but it's the Hoosiers that ultimately have led this organization for those 190 years that really allow us to navigate even the most difficult times.
It's awesome. I was driving in Chicago, not too long ago, a couple months ago, and I'm driving on the Dan Ryan, and I see this great billboard advertising for Old National Bank in Chicago, and I thought to myself, I absolutely love it. As a Hoosier who likes to see Indiana succeed, for so long, as you know, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of our banks were acquired, right? And we lost headquarters of banks. And to see it now, an Indiana headquartered bank like Old National going to markets like Nashville, that you mentioned, Chicago, and just seeing it advertised in downtown Chicago, I loved it. So that's really, really neat.
You can't imagine how many texts and phone calls I get after people see that billboard along the highway there.
So, Jim, under your leadership at Old National, as we've talked about a little bit, you seem to have a distinctive strategy for acquiring banks as part of your growth strategy. And you mentioned that you look for banks that share your values and some of your core operating principles. And I know I've seen you also talk about the need in the banking sector with all the change to be more efficient in how you conduct business. And you've made some strategic acquisitions. I think you've exited some lines of business. And I know from paying a lot of attention to the banking industry, it is in a constant state of flux. Obviously, the regulation tends to spike, depending on the administration, but it's ever increasing. Technology investments are important, and cybersecurity threats are real. You've got artificial intelligence coming fast. You've got fintech. With all those different aspects of the banking sector and how you think about your strategy as you're growing the bank, it's a lot to consider.
Now that you say it, it is a lot to consider.
How do you sleep at night?
Exactly. Not well. We always start where if a relationship is an important part of the buying decision for the consumer or businesses, we have the right to win. And in fact, we can put just as good, if not better, people to help our clients than anybody else, regardless of the technology that's involved. And funny enough, today, Old National has competitive technology across, all of our platforms. And I don't think ultimately, at least our clients rank technology as the number one reason why they went to a bank. It's usually around people and locations and familiarity. And whether you're talking about JP Morgan Chase or you're talking about Old National, I think those are the things they're attracted to at first. Now, you need to be competitive with all the technology. And certainly there is an unending amount of change that's going to happen to society and to financial services is going to come from technology. In fact, it's really interesting. You can appreciate this. So we have a deep partnership with a company called Infosys, who has the big regional headquarters over out by the airport. And they're helping us navigate some of this change with respect to AI and digitization and technology. We leverage a lot of their resources. That was a nice win for us in Indiana to leverage this company that's made this big investment. But for us, at the end of the day, and I do think that change will ultimately be transformational. I just believe it's probably going to be a little bit slower than maybe the columns you read every day or the social media posts you read every day about how AI is going to transform the economy. It's going to happen. It's probably just going to happen a little bit slower. But if we can just bring great Midwestern values to our relationships and our clients, I think that's going to win us a lot of relationships and ultimately drive greater success.
Banking is still, of course, it's a relationship business, right? And word of mouth and how you get treated, all those types of things are still incredibly important. And you probably don't see that changing. It's part of probably what you're talking about, right? I mean, you still have to build relationships. You have to earn trust, all those things, right?
Absolutely. It's ironic because many of those folks today that we've been on a spree of hiring folks in the last 5 years since I've been CEO and really out telling our story. And it's no different whether telling a story to a potential client or a potential new hire. We've been telling the Old National story and how we've evolved and how we continue to change and how we continue to invest in our communities and our people. And so many people are attracted from those largest banks in the country who have every product and every technology and everything that they could imagine, but they're attracted to how we deliver our business. It's really a client-centric, community-involved organization. And so that's been attractive. And I spend an awful lot of time personally recruiting individuals to come join the team. Many of them come to the headquarters in Evansville. We sit across from each other, and I tell them that I am there to support them. I work for them. The opportunity is when you come to Old National, you get me, and I can help manage those relationships. If it makes a phone call, a text, a personal visit, whatever it is, and that goes a long way with those folks we're trying to hire. And so we've been able to attract an awful lot of talent, not only here that lives in Indiana, but also bring them to the state, move them to the state of Indiana and Evansville specifically.
That's awesome. That's great for Indiana. So I mentioned some of the acquisitions that you've completed recently. Where do you see, in terms of the bank, are we going to see Old National on the West Coast one day? Or you think of super regional banks and banks that are larger than yours, although yours are already a top 30 bank, it sounds like, in the U.S. So where do you see eventually, if you look 10 years or 15 years, 20 years down the road for Old National?
We've had this kind of Big Ten strategy, and we've got the partnership with the Big Ten where we are the bank of the Big Ten. And now the Big Ten's gone off in this big expansion spree.
You are. By default, you might be in California.
Well, honestly, I don't see us going out that far. You never say never, and we will continue to evolve. I think there's going to be lots of choices. One thing that's clear to me is this industry is not getting any easier. And you made the mention around, having scale. Increasingly, scale is important. The good news is for Old National, we're not compelled to do anything. We're not trying to solve any problems. We've got young management team. We've got great growth prospects. We've got great financial performance. We've been around an awful long time. So we're not trying to solve anything through mergers and acquisitions. Having said that, it's made our company better. And we've achieved this great performance today because of these past partnerships. So we'll continue to look, but I'm also incredibly sensitive. One of the things that keeps me up at night, I get this question a lot, what keeps you up at night? And one of the biggest things that keeps me up, can we maintain our culture? Can we maintain that connectedness to our team members, to our communities, to our clients? I know that as we get bigger, I won't be able to spend as much time in front of team members and clients and doing community activities. I'll be spending more time in Washington, D.C., more time in New York City, more time distracted from the things I really like to do, which is clients and communities and team members. And so I think there's a situation where bigger isn't always better. And we know some examples of some really big companies that aren't very connected. And so I think I worry about, as we get bigger, can we maintain that? It's a family atmosphere. We feel like family to each other. That's a cliche thing to say, but I truly believe in our heart that it is an important part of why people choose to work at Old National, and ultimately why they choose to bank at Old National, is we like to treat people like family. And so I do think that bigger is not always better. We'll see where we go. Certainly the opportunities will be there. And to the extent it makes sense and we think we can maintain our culture, we'll take advantage of them. But if we can't, then we won't.
Yeah. Well, and of course, talent plays such a huge role. And a lot of talented people like companies that are growing because it means more and different types of opportunities for them and their careers as well. So I'm sure that's, while culture you want to, of course, maintain, you also want to be a company where people say, gosh, I could come in here and maybe have a growth opportunity to even go higher, right?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Nashville earlier. We have a lot of people who have raised their hands and said, I'll go to Nashville. I'll be a part of that. But we've had people that want to go to Chicago and try things out. Yeah. So it's really good having a wider and bigger footprint and creating more opportunities. We have almost 4,400 employees. And so that gives us an opportunity to move people around and take advantage of that. Still primarily, the bulk of it here is in the Midwest and will continue to always be in the Midwest. And so it's an exciting day for us. But at the same time, I'm really thoughtful about we need to make sure that our growth is, we don't sacrifice the things, our values, just to grow.
Well, as I said earlier, it's just awesome to see an Indiana company, headquartered company, growing. And I want to talk for a minute about being headquartered in Indiana. Of course, being headquartered in Evansville, I know how important it is to Evansville that you're headquartered there because you're adding people and you're growing there. Talk a minute about, from your perspective, the importance of Indiana having headquartered companies here. And I'm kind of going back to my days working with Mitch Daniels in economic development, and knowing how much of a priority we put in trying to, keep headquarters here, go out and attract new headquarters. It's not easy, of course, attracting new headquarters. So anytime we see a company like Old National growing from Indiana, it's a lot. It means a lot. But how do you think about that, being an Indiana headquartered bank?
I completely appreciate the importance of having a local headquarters and all those companies that are locally headquartered in Evansville. And there's many great companies like a Toyota, right? That's not headquartered in Evansville, Indiana, but has a large presence and operation. And they couldn't be a better community partner. So I think you have examples like that. But being where the CEO sits, the opportunity to make impacts quickly, I think really matters. And Indiana is really blessed to have a lot of great companies that are call Indiana home. Evansville will always be our homes from my perspective. As long as I get to make that decision, Evansville will always be. And obviously the impact is tremendous. I think about our company last year. We did about $12 million in philanthropy. Now, that's across our footprint, but a big bulk of that ends up here in Indiana. We did 57,000 volunteer hours across our footprint. And again, a vast majority of our employees are sitting right here in Indiana that get to make that community impact. And I think companies like Old National, who share Hoosier values, wake up every day and think about, yes, we have this objective to serve our shareholders, but we also have this objective to take care of all of our stakeholders, including our community, including our people. And I don't think that you can underestimate the amount of impact that local Hoosier companies make in the state of Indiana.
No, I agree. And one of the things that Mitch Daniels and others and myself noticed, and Mickey Maurer and before me, and we always focus on this, is that, the CEOs like you who are headquartered here, they're engaged in their communities and they're engaged with philanthropy, but most importantly, they're leading. They're leading on so many important initiatives in their community, in the region, and the state. And that's kind of where I want to turn next, because you've done that. And again, no coincidence. You're headquartered here. You care about the community in which you operate and which you live. But you've been incredibly involved there in Evansville and in the greater Southwest region. And on that front, because I know you've been involved with a lot of the organizations I mentioned, of course, one of the biggest challenges for Indiana, and including places like Evansville, is filling the talent gap and attracting people and growing the population. As you think about, and you're trying to attract employees, how do you sell Indiana? How do you sell the region that you're in when you're trying to attract workers to Old National, and just in general when you're thinking about economic development for the whole region?
Evansville and Indiana is truly a great place to live. And, I think about if family values are important to you, it's a great place to start and raise a family. We have great educational opportunities with 3 universities and colleges. We have great public schools. We do have some really nice community amenities, and we can talk a little bit about regional cities and then Ready 1.0 and 2.0 and the impact they're making. But the state of Indiana is doing a good job thinking about how do we grow our regional economies and how do we invest back in Indiana. And so we started with a pretty good amount of cultural assets, but we're growing those cultural assets and that place where people want to live and stay and work. So I think the other thing that's a little bit unique about Evansville is within about 2 hours, you can be in St. Louis and you can be in Nashville, you can be in Indianapolis, and you can be in Louisville. And I think that's an attractive point for people that know we're just a little bit farther away. However, we need to continue to grow our quality of place, and ultimately that will drive even greater population growth. And the state, I can tell you, is doing more proactive work than any other Midwestern state, that's for sure, in this particular space. And that collaborative effort is starting to pay dividends. You're starting to see, Evansville got recognized as one of the greatest places to do remote work from. So I think people are waking up and realizing that while we may not always have the natural biggest assets of having access to water or mountains or things like that, it's a great place to raise a family.
And it's gotten easier to get there. So, as you mentioned, I mean, only a couple hours now from Indianapolis. I remember making trips down there when it would take me about 3.5. So I-69 is a major asset to connect Evansville, right?
It absolutely is. That's a huge part of how we get back and forth. Think about getting to Bloomington, right, or getting all the way to Indianapolis. It's an important part. So for us, I would also mention recently the state helped us secure flights back to Chicago. And it was an awful lot of hard work from some local businesses and our economic development agencies and the airport. But that's an important part. We got to have connectivity, not only by car, but connectivity by air. And I think without that, places like Evansville and Fort Wayne risk population challenges. So
let's take a quick break. This is Off the Record Podcast.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Off the Record Podcast. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and I'm talking with Jim Ryan, Chairman and CEO of Old National Bank. So talk a little bit about the river development, because I know that there's been recent announcements there in terms of a long-range plan there and dollars allocated there. And I've been down there, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Near your headquarters, it's absolutely a beautiful area. But what do you think the opportunity is for Evansville especially, but all along the Ohio River there?
I think there's an opportunity to really embrace it in a way that we haven't embraced the river in the most recent history that I've been there. And if you were sitting at our headquarters looking down on the river every single night, you could see a museum out one side, you could see restaurants, you could see the casino, and you can see a lot of people taking advantage of that. But I do think there's an opportunity to even do a better job. So part of the Regional Development Authority that I'm a part of has been there to administer the original Regional Cities Grant, the Ready 1.0 grants, and now recently the Ready 2.0 grants. And that's an unprecedented, incredible opportunity for the state, for the region, for all the counties to really take advantage of these investments. And so we use some dollars to hire Sasaki to develop a plan. And this is an international firm that actually helped develop the Chicago riverfront. So the credibility is high with this organization, but they helped us build through a lot of community engagement, hours and hours and hours of community engagement and surveys and working alongside our leaders to really develop a 50-mile stretch of the river, starting in Newburgh, going through Evansville, all the way to Mount Vernon. And really, how do we engage the river in a more dramatic way? How do we bring the cities and towns to the river? And how do we bring the river into the cities and towns? And so there's been some plans that have been released. It's interesting spending a lot of time in economic development. Everybody wants change to happen overnight, but these are really long-term plans, and there's some incremental changes we will continue to make. But this is a 20-year vision. These are aspirational visions. It's going to take a lot of dollars. It's going to take a lot of private investment. It's going to take a lot of public investment. Hopefully, we'll get some support from the federal government because of the river and the flooding and that goes along those rivers. But this is a long-term vision for really transforming this important asset that we have and really bringing the best of it into our cities and towns along the way. For example, in Evansville, one of the great ideas is, building out more restaurants, building out overlooks into that, bringing the community to the river with more activities and more events, more housing, which we know Indiana is desperately in need of more housing. The whole country is, but Indiana is desperately in need of more housing. How do we bring more housing to downtown urban centers? And then how do we create more green space? How do we take that and not make it all hardscape? We have this challenge because there is a flood wall right downtown Evansville that protects us when the river does move up and down. But how do we turn that hardscape into something a little bit softer that the community can use, every single day as an asset?
Yeah, that's awesome. So incredible quality of life opportunity in terms of attracting talent. Of course, you've been really involved, Jim, all these economic development initiatives for Southwest Indiana, but as a state as well, you're, as I mentioned in the intro, you're on CICP boards. You get a feel for an understanding of what's happening in Indiana, what's been happening in Indiana as a state when it comes to economic development. If there was one thing that, or maybe it's two, things that you could, change or improve about Indiana in terms of its just attractiveness, whether it's people or companies or, opportunities to expand as a company, is there one or two things that you think, gosh, if we we're able to accomplish this, it would really change the game in a positive way for us?
Well, it's a great question. And there are so many community assets. Oftentimes, people focus on the things we don't have versus the things we have. And I'm a positive person by nature. And I really think the state of Indiana, while there are plenty of things that we need to do a better job of and we need to strive to always get better, we're really doing many of the things right. I got a chance to see it through my Midwest lens, and I travel 2-3 days a week. I'm on the road traveling. Many of those days are inside our footprints, whether it's Chicago or Minneapolis or Grand Rapids, Indianapolis, or just across our footprint. And I see how well Indiana's doing and the high level of collaboration they have with state leaders and local businesses. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And I think we're on to something here. You know, the original Regional Cities grant, which ultimately became the Ready set of grants, I think is absolutely key to our success. If we don't focus in on quality of place initiatives, we are absolutely going to lose the war for talent and for population growth. And ultimately, at the end of the day, where we are going to be more successful is where we can grow our population, grow our talent, which will ultimately lead to people wanting to bring their companies and jobs here. And I think we need to focus in on the high-tech, high-wage jobs. And we need to take those traditional manufacturing jobs and give them the tools to transform themselves to really take advantage of all the changes through technology that are coming. But I see it every day. I see our universities coming to the table and say, how can we change? How can we create degrees? How can we create just learning opportunities for people? There's this big initiative, working on how do we bring companies and give students credit right out of high school for actually work activities, right? Through Ascend, that's a CICP initiative. How do we create those kind of opportunities for people? And so I just see the highest level of collaboration across our state, and it's not done by one sector. It's really the public and the private sector coming together every single day. So I think it's more doubling down of the things we're working on that ultimately drive to greater success.
I want to switch to a little different topic. I always ask our Indiana 250 honorees, who are some of the mentors that really made a difference in your career and your life? And I'm sure you've had some at Old National, but you may have had some way before that. Curious on who had outsized impact on Jim Ryan's career and professional and maybe personal life too.
I could start by going back to that finance professor who got me the opportunity to work at a bank and never looked back since. Greg Dimkov at Grand Valley certainly made a tremendous impact on my life. And I can think about one of my early bosses at Old Kent, a guy named Ron Mishler, who actually gave me the opportunity to learn from him. But the person I'd probably highlight the most is my predecessor, Bob Jones. And Bob is a fantastic person. We stay very well connected. In fact, we were emailing this morning and really gave me the opportunity to really expand and develop my career, and ultimately, which led to my ascension in his role. And interestingly enough, Bob was an amazing mentor. And sometimes it was things to do, and sometimes it was things not to do, right? You learn from your mentors. But maybe one of the greatest gifts that Bob gave me is ultimately when I was announced and named as his successor, he left the company in a very short order. And he said, look, I'm not going to be here looking over your shoulder. And I remember he left me this pair of baby doll shoes and said, make these shoes your own.
That's awesome.
You don't have to live in my shoes. You're the leader that you're going to be. And he left the company and really allowed me to do the things that I want to do. And honestly, I did things differently, and for good or bad, I did things differently. And he never gave me any criticism, publicly or privately, regarding that high level of change. And I think maybe that's the best gift as a mentor he could have ever given me.
Yeah, that's a sign of a great leader, because you're right. I mean, not all company transitions go that way, right? Where the former CEO is kind of looking over the new CEO's shoulder, and sometimes they serve as chairman for some period of time, and definitely looking over their shoulder. So that is a great gift, and that's a great story. And Bob is a great guy who also, like you, just cared so much about the region, cared so much about the state of Indiana, and still does, I know, as serving in different ways.
Well, Old National had this long track record doing it, but I got to tell you, Bob Jones energized the company on its community impact. And he would often say, we have a moral responsibility to take care of our communities. I mean, that's how strong he felt about moral responsibility. And so I think his passion and enthusiasm for doing that just went throughout the entire company, and certainly gave me a new set of motivation. I grew up instinctively with that idea that part of your job as a citizen and as a person who lives in a community is to give back and take care of the community. But I got to tell you, he supercharged our company with respect to that. And certainly, I'm a better leader in our communities today because of his role modeling.
Jim, I know one of your hobbies is golf. I know that Southwest Indiana has some of the most beautiful golf courses in the state. You know, bankers are kind of known for building relationships and using golf in that way. Is the golf course still a place where business transacts? Is that a popular activity for bankers still?
Absolutely. So I think you know this, but I live out at Victoria National down in Evansville, and we bring clients there about 150 nights a year, really developing those relationships. And obviously, Victoria's got a great setup where you can stay there and play golf there. When you're playing golf with somebody at Victoria, it could be 5+ hours.
Right.
But you also get the opportunity to stay there and have dinner. And oftentimes, while I don't play golf with our clients very often, I do go there. In fact, I'll be there this Thursday night with clients. I do go there for dinner and drinks with them and engage with them. And I think that's a unique thing where we can take people from, this group's coming in from Wisconsin. So we bring people from all of our footprint and we bring them to Evansville, bring them to Newburgh, Indiana to play golf at Victoria National. It's a real highlight for everybody. And then we get the opportunity as leaders to go sit down with our clients and get to know them a little bit better.
So I'm on the right track telling my son he needs to learn how to play golf?
Yes. And in fact, as you know, my chief of staff, Annie Hills, is with us right now. And I've been interacting with her this week on how do we get more women from Old National trained and skilled in golf. And so she's actually working on an initiative right now as we speak to really give women the opportunity on our dime to learn the game of golf and to make sure that they're not excluded because maybe they didn't have the opportunity growing up. Maybe there was nobody there that ever invested in them in that particular thing. And what I don't want to do is leave people behind because they don't. For better or worse, this is a tool that's used in business, and we want to make sure it's open to everybody.
I think you're on the board or maybe previously on the board of an organization called Golf Gives Back. So the name implies it's more than just golf. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Yeah, the Golf Gives Back is actually the organization and ultimately helps drive the charitable aspects of the Korn Ferry Championship. And so the Korn Ferry Championship, as you know, has been held at Victoria National for a number of years. And that's really exciting. In fact, just a few years ago in the Korn Ferry Championship, I got the chance to play with Scotty Scheffler at Victoria. And there's a whole great set of stories around that. However, the Golf Gives Back is really the opportunity to organize the tournament and then take the proceeds and really give them to charities in our communities. And interestingly enough, Building Blocks has been a big charity for us as a result of the proceeds of the tournament. The tournament's very successful. And these golf tournaments are very hard to put on and actually make money. And the Golf Gives Back board really tries hard to ensure we not only create a great experience for the golfers and for the visitors and the viewers, but and showcase Evansville and Southwest Indiana, but we also really hard. Our chairman of the board at Golf Gives Back is Ron Romaine, and he wants to make sure that we deliver the dollars to the charity and worry about, in this particular case, it's early childhood education. So you may know this, but and I invited you to come out and join us, but we're moving the tournament to French Lick.
Yeah.
And we're so excited about the French Lick Resort that's going to host the tournament. And I think it'll be even a better showcase of Indiana and obviously the amenities we have here in Indiana. So it's October 3rd through the 6th.
Okay.
So if you're listening to the podcast, you want to come out, please come out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it's going to create a different kind of experience. Not only is the golf going to be fantastic at the Pete Dye course, but you're going to have a full opportunity to enjoy the best of Southern Indiana at the resort and all the amenities they have there. So that'll be exciting. It's a big move for us to leave Newburgh, Evansville, and go to French Lick, but I think it's going to even create a better opportunity and hopefully make even a greater financial impact to our charities.
Well, Jim, we've made it to Off the Record Speed Round, where I ask you a series of questions and you try to give me brief answers. So you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. Jim's favorite movie?
Rudy.
Favorite place to vacation?
Naples, Florida.
Favorite musical artist?
I don't have one. I'm going to say any guitar rock of the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
What is the first thing you do in the morning?
My wife and I spend the first hour and a half having a cup of coffee, talking about our day and our morning.
What a great way to start the day. Title of the last book you read?
I'm not a huge book reader. I consume so much media every single day. I read all the local business journals, including IBJ.
Thank you.
Every single morning. I read a lot of economic data and I read a lot of political data, and I don't reserve a lot of time for reading books.
What food can you not live without?
Mexican food.
Best advice you ever received?
ultimately just be yourself, right? Be who you are. Authenticity is so important in business and relationships. And so just be authentic and don't try to be anything you're not.
Advice for a young person who wants to become a leader.
If you think about working hard, right? And that's the foundation for all this stuff. Just get up and work hard. And then ultimately, the skills that allow you to accelerate your career ultimately need to change and morph over time. Yes, you need to be a good networker, and yes, you need to be involved, step up, answer the call, but I also think emotional intelligence, right? You can't underestimate, somebody that has a lot of emotional intelligence and communication. We talked about communication earlier, developing your communication skills. That's been a criticism of some younger folks, but ultimately at the end of the day, you got to learn how to use the skills you need in the current role, but an eye towards the future in order to continue to rise.
Good advice. Jim, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on the Indiana 250 podcast. I want to thank you for all you're doing, growing a great business here in Indiana that is headquartered here in Evansville. And thank you for all you're doing for the state and for the Evansville region as a whole.
Well, Nate, I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to the whole team. I'm grateful to Gary for the opportunity to be here. And again, I can't underestimate. Again, I read all of the Midwestern business journals, and the IBJ does it by far better than anybody else. So thank you for the opportunity
Very,
to be
very
here.
kind of you to say. Thanks, Jim. Thanks to Old National Bank CEO Jim Ryan for our conversation today. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with a new Indiana 250 off-the-record conversation soon.